Welcome to Mindful Mondays, episode 9. My name is Michelle Precourt. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to recognize and appreciate our Indigenous friends and the Indigenous communities from where we're broadcasting from. It's important to note that there were people here before us who were and continue to cultivate community the way that we are today. I'm broadcasting live today from Squamish Nation, also known as Squamish, British Columbia. I'd also like to tell you a little bit for folks who might be joining us for the first time today, what Mindful Mondays is all about. So point 1, I already said, cultivating community. Point 2 is about learning and growing from each other and sharing collective wisdom. At the heart of all of this, which is really important to me, is about creating healthier humans and healthier human beings and healthier workplace cultures. And how we do that is through sharing of knowledge. So we've talked about, this is episode 9, as I said. Previous episodes, we've talked about things like career-related stress, recruitment challenges, workplace wellness. We've talked about mental health in the workplace. And today, we're talking about employee engagement and workplace culture. So with that, Ahmed, I'll pass it over to you and introduce our guest.
Thank you so much, Michelle. No, I'm excited to be here again for another one of our sessions. We have with us today Sherry Engel. So Sherry is a highly qualified HR consultant who has more than 20 years of human resources experience, including a decade in executive level roles. As a consultant, Sherry serves clients in a variety of sectors and company sizes. Sherry is the owner and lead consultant at Loft Consulting and a managing director at First 30 Onboarding Solutions. And of course, Michelle, cannot forget you. She is our HR consultant and the founder of Mindful HR Services and the brains behind Mindful Mondays. And we have myself here for anyone who's joining for the first time. I'm a marketing and brand strategist. However, today I'm here as your host and moderator, and I'm excited for the upcoming conversation today. So I'm going to go into a little bit more on what Michelle spoke of earlier, but what we're hoping to get into for today. And so this is all about making meaningful connections at work. And that is a broad stroke term, but it can mean so many different things. I think, we're really going to connect on engaging employees and what that means for, taking a bit of a different viewpoint, maybe from the perspective of feeling connected to our team, manager, or workplace culture. So let's jump into it. Michelle, I'm going to put you on the hot seat first today. How does this broadcast and discussion make meaningful connections at work fit into your Mindful Monday theme?
So as I said, Ahmed, Mindful Mondays is about creating healthier humans and healthier workplace cultures. And so when I'm thinking about making meaningful connections, to me, it's about team cohesion. That creates connections. Connections build relationships. And as humans, we need this, right? Even though many of us are working in environments like this, I'm working from home. Sherry, I know you work from home. Yep. We can still do this in a way that creates meaning. And this vision of healthier humans who feel more balanced at work and at home, ultimately, and there's studies to show this, ultimately, we're just going to do more, right? And employers love that. So in short, that's where I see this connection.
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head there about this whole piece around connections. It doesn't matter where we are. Through the pandemic, we've been talking a lot about how do we maintain connections working from home, especially from a perspective of being closed off or, not having those boardroom or the walk by water cooler type chats and those kinds of things, but we can still do a lot of that. And it's hugely important that we continue doing that as well for our employees. And so, making those meaningful connections, really a great point. Sherry, before I jump into my next question that really highlights on you, I was just wondering, do you have anything to add to the meaningful connections piece as it relates to your business or what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's interesting because I started my company just prior to the pandemic, actually. And so several of my clients and several of my key connections, like Michelle, as an example, I've never met in person, but I feel very connected to them. And so, I think we can really make very strong connections, even remotely. And it goes about, to me, it goes deeper. It goes to the level of human care. And, you know, actually caring about individuals as much as we do, if we're speaking in the employer terms, as much as we do about the outcomes. So I've been very fortunate to make very meaningful connections, even remotely. And I feel that some of them are as strong as some of the connections that I make with people in person. So it's really quite nice. Actually, as you were saying that, Michelle, I was thinking, you know, it's interesting. We've never met in person, but I feel very connected to you. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. It's the if there's a positive side from a world pandemic, it's taught us that we can build relationships remotely. I was reflecting on this not that long ago about how, as a young girl, I had a pen pal in Japan, and writing letters, you know, that sort of thing. And I feel like social media is a little bit like that. Using tools like StreamYard, using tools like Zoom to help us connect with folks. It works. It really does work.
For sure.
Yeah. No, I think this is probably a really great lead in, Sherry, into the question I want to ask you, because you talk about outcomes and making those connections with people, you know, whether it's in person or remotely or what have you. So as an HR consultant, what are you seeing in terms of engagement at work? What strategies are working well for employers and employees together?
Yeah. So this is a really difficult question, because I think there's different drivers through different organizations, and different individuals require different drivers too, to help them feel engaged and motivated at work. One thing that I have found is very helpful is when employers can connect what the individual does with the purpose of an organization. So going deeper than, you know, what service are we offering, but why are we offering? And, you know, Simon Sinek has that 3 target graphic that I think is extremely powerful and extremely meaningful to individuals when you understand what is that connection to the purpose. So that's one that I think is really, it goes a very long way. And Michelle, I know you do some work around this as well. I don't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah, well, what comes to mind for me is values. So it's a very, very common practice in the career development work that I do, is to talk about values. What are your personal values? And then how does that link to the company values? So you can look at this from different perspectives. You can look at it from, I'm in search of a job. What are my values? And yes, you're being interviewed by the employer, but you are also, or should be, interviewing them. And values are really important. And then once you're in-house, a regular check-in on values is going to be helpful for you to connect, right? Strategic planning isn't I understand that senior leaders do the strategic planning, but embedding yourself into that process, even in your own way, to understand, how am I contributing to this? Because sometimes you're right, Sherry, it's really hard to make that connection. And so if you're going to be connected at work, that's one of the things, values, 100%. And then there's the relationship side of it, right? If I know that I can count on my peers, whether it's on a project or something personal, that is going to, it's always the hardest part about leaving a job, right? Sherry, you've left a job, I've left a job. Always the hardest part about leaving a job is those relationships.
For sure.
And then the other part that I think about, and then I'll pass it back to you, Amit, is the, for me anyways, as an independent, this is where it's probably the most challenging, aside from, you know, the business development side of it, all that stuff, all of the things that we have to do as entrepreneurs, but it's the connections. So I come in, I do a thing, and then I leave. I'm not always there for the long term. And so it's, those connections aren't as strong as they are like you and I, Sherry. We've built a strong connection, even though you're in Ontario and I'm in BC. We've built this strong relationship and this strong bond because we stay in touch, we stay connected. We're doing things like this, right? Yeah, so that's where that connection piece is really important.
Can I add something to that? What you just sparked for me is one thing that I find being a consultant is, like you said, you come in, you do something and you leave. We're not necessarily connected or seeing what we do through to the ultimate outcome that it has. And I think that that is what helps to drive engagement with employees, is understanding what is this thing that I'm doing? How is this, whatever it is that I'm achieving, going to ultimately end up helping the organization, and can I follow it through to the impact that it has? And so that's, I think there's some discipline required from an organizational perspective to really help communicate and articulate that connection for individuals who might not be able to make the connection themselves, because I do believe that everybody is able to impact that ultimate outcome. Actually, I'll just tell a quick story. There was this story about when JFK went to NASA, when they were sending somebody to the moon, a man to the moon. And the goal and the purpose and everything was around sending the man to the moon. And he stopped and he engaged with one of the men washing the windows. He said, "What are you doing?" And the window washer said, "I'm sending a man to the moon." And that's how connected to the purpose and to the outcome every single person that worked at NASA was. They had one mission. So,
amazing. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great analogy. That's perfect.
Yeah, that's really strong, and meaningful when we talk about that connectedness. So it's not just, connecting people from a relationship perspective, but ensuring that we're connecting people back to the objectives, the goals of the organization. How are we moving things forward? What is it that we're doing? And ultimately, this all relates back to business objectives and ensuring that our people are feeling empowered to act on those business objectives and contribute their parts to that whole thing.
Absolutely.
Sherry, from your perspective, again, in your line of work, you talked about kind of this sort of fly in, fly out, connecting and coming out. From your perspective as a consultant, how are you working with those companies to perhaps further engagement? Is there maybe additional tactics around feedback loops or anything like that you're doing that help bring some of those connections forward from I don't know if it'd be a strategic or tactical perspective, but something more that's happening in that you're seeing from your lens?
Yeah, and actually I think it's both strategic and tactical. From a feedback loop perspective. So a couple of the strategies that I think are really, really important. And this is where I feel like sometimes we have to make what is seemingly organic or natural feedback, we almost have to systematize it in a way that we remember, because people get busy, right? People get busy, and so there's not enough time. But also with a lot of organizations having a remote workforce, there isn't that organic discussion by the water cooler or whatever it might have been previously. And so we have to systematize. And so, some of the things would be having frequent one-on-one discussions with team members and really booking them and honoring them. And, this is the last thing that gets canceled from my calendar. And maybe it's templated so that it's just, what's a highlight, what's a win, and what's a challenge. Like very simple. And how are you? Remember to ask, how are you? And so there's that. And then just figuring out opportunities for individuals to engage perhaps outside of their direct, chain of command, or whatever you might want to call it, however you call it. Perhaps there's opportunity to foster connections with other individuals within other departments through either social or strategically picking teams for projects. It really is about taking more time and consideration than you might think to foster the connections and provide the feedback. It's interesting because sort of a new trend in HR is away with performance appraisals. And I think some people are thinking that means, unfortunately, away with feedback. And that's actually not what it means. The away with the performance appraisals, in my opinion, is away with once a year, rating and evaluating and whatnot. But it means we have to replace those feedback channels with more frequent, more authentic, more meaningful discussions. And sometimes we have to provide individuals with tools to help guide those discussions.
Yeah, something that I've heard before from a previous engagement that I've had is feedback is a gift, and it truly is. Like when we think of, I loved what you said about do away with the 1 year, because that 1 year touch point is not what's going to drive engagement with your employee. I mean, sure it will, because it's tied to certain objectives and what have you, but I think the crux of it all is we as people, we as employees, we as humans need that more constant, considerate feedback so that we can learn and grow from. So, the positive reinforcement and the, as HR always likes to say, the continue doing this and stop doing this type of phrasing. But it's really helpful. It's those things that help move those conversations and help move the needle, not just towards company objectives, but towards personal growth. And so it's ensuring that we are maintaining that personal growth for people as much as we are maintaining the growth objectives for the organization in whatever, facet that looks like. That's kind of sort of what came to my mind there when I was hearing you talk about that. Michelle, did you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I want to go back to the values conversation that we had, because I think that that's also where you can see people making a connection. I said that earlier, but when what you were talking about is this idea of performance appraisals going away, but it might be going away and coming back as something different.
That's exactly right.
And so is it this thing that I did, or is it the behaviors that we want to see in the workplace? Kindness goes a really far way versus, you didn't meet this objective or that objective. And those are, there's a balance there, of course. There's always a balance there. And you said that as well, Ahmed, that there are deliverables. We're accountable to our clients and our customers and our internal and external stakeholders. But people always buy from people that they know and they like. And so again, that, at least for me anyways, that ties back to how are you interacting with me and can I count on you? I'm seeing more of that around a greater awareness towards, I'm going to call it soft skills, but emotional intelligence, or in my world, mindfulness, and the behaviors that we're expecting. And I'll put in bunny ears, measuring that. I think that's where we might be seeing some of these performance conversations shifting and changing a bit.
You've touched on something that I think is really important too, Michelle, which is, values. Sometimes these values are broad words and they're broad terms. And, I will use an example that we had at an organization I worked with, integrity. Integrity was a value. And of course, on the surface, integrity, sure, that's a great value to have within an organization. But the challenge is when we don't define the behaviors underneath integrity and what integrity means at this company, it becomes very hard to communicate around integrity, because nobody wants to be told they don't have integrity and nobody wants to tell somebody they don't have integrity, right? But when you have specific, this is what it means here, and these are desired behaviors and actions that fall under this term, now everybody knows this is how I show up and this is what I can expect from other people. And so to me, that's where some of those connections become a little bit more aligned, because we can all, I think on the surface, we can all say, yes, I believe in integrity. Yes, I believe in honesty. Yes, I believe in whatever the big concepts are. But having a little bit more granular and articulated what that means at your organization, that's where the power comes.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that old expression, you're walking walk the talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to tie into this conversation, because I think it's really important, is well-being
Yes,
at work.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And frankly, if we are not well, we're not going to perform, right? And it's more than, having a cold or a flu. It's this emotional well-being. And if I am at capacity
Yes.
and I am being given more,
Yes.
and it's a culture where you can't say no, you're going to lose people. So it's important to have conversations around capacity, like those check-in conversations that you were having. So how are you?
Yep.
How's your workload? How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how often do you hear this, Sherry or Ahmed? How are you? I'm busy. Busy isn't a feeling. So drilling down and saying, well, busy can be good, right? Because there's this balance between, and Ahmed, we had this conversation with Dave, remember Dave Redikoff,
Yep.
around career related stress. And he talked about this sort of balance between boredom and the opposite of boredom, which is, spinning out of control. There's somewhere in there that is the sweet spot. And it doesn't mean there's not peaks and valleys, 100%. But if you're always at a peak, and I'm staring at one right now, it's out my window, all these beautiful mountains. But if you're always at that peak, that's going to be a challenge. You're going to run out of speed, and you're going to end up with burnout and high costs associated with benefits and sick time, and just having those conversations around well-being is really important.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that, okay, first of all, I personally need to work on that balance between overwhelm and boredom, because I find I'm either sitting on either end and I'm not very often in between. So any tips, I will take them. But when I was thinking about and preparing for this discussion, it really did become apparent to me that, taking on more, doing more, relying on people for more, that is not engagement. Those are not the same thing. And so even if somebody is prepared to take on more and put up their hand to do more, yes, they might be engaged or they might be afraid. Like, really, we do have an obligation as an employer and as an employee, as a human being, to say, whoa, I can't do anymore. And for me to do my best work, I need to ease up a bit. Like, let me be my best self, within reason, obviously, because like we said, there are those two extremes. I really like that you brought up this point, Michelle, because I think it's very, very important to remind everybody. And I do think burnout is very real. I have lived it. I have experienced it. And was I an engaged employee? Highly engaged employee. But it didn't mean that I could continue at the pace that I was going at.
Yeah, the other thing that I'll just say is also, as leaders, please watch for the signs. So, Sherry, I know you work hard, you take on a lot, and you don't say no. So we have to watch for those other signs of someone might say, oh yeah, I can do that. Oh yeah, I can do that. And yes, there's personal responsibility. 100%. We're responsible for taking care of ourselves and learning to flex and say no. But if there are other signs like emotional outbursts at work, like showing up late, like looking disheveled, these are some really general statements. Please, as leaders, watch out for these types of signs, because your high performers aren't always going to say no. And then, frankly, as Canadians, I see one of my colleagues is online here. Ellie, hello. We talk about this culture of Canadians being so polite and not saying no. So we might not say no outwardly, but we might be really struggling inside. So
Mhm.
that's just another point that I'm quite passionate about.
Mhm. And I think as leaders, just like we talked about, um, being very aware and very intentional in the feedback, being aware and being very intentional about how we distribute work and projects is also really important. It's important for the people who can't say no and are already overloaded. It's also important for those people who might be borderline disengaged to say, wait a second, I'm not feeling connected. I'm not feeling connected to the team. I'm not feeling connected to the purpose. I'm not feeling overly engaged right now. How do you bring them, pull them back in? Maybe it's through a special project that, yeah, they might have a little bit more catch up time to do than this person who's, your superstar but is already doing everything. Being aware of distribution of not just tasks but opportunities, because a lot of these projects and these special things are opportunities.
Mhm. I'm gonna pause us here. I love that where this discussion is going, but we still have a few more questions to
Sure.
kind of get to, and we have just a few minutes left in our time today. So I'm gonna move us along here. So Michelle, we talked about this in our last Mindful Monday about how the pendulum has swung from the workplace being very employer centric prior to unionism, employment standards, and other such regulations to what some may suggest is now employee centric environment. Do you think that this idea of engagement at work is too idealistic? Dare I say, are employees asking too much, or are employees giving too much, or sorry, employers giving too much? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so you talked about employment standards. So I'll start there. I think that ESA sets the baseline. These are the minimum requirements that employers need set, and it's necessary. It's needed to protect people. It's also, unionism came in because people were dying, right? They were dying on the job. And so I'm being dramatic, but, I think about mining and the
Yeah.
railroads and this sort of thing. So unionism came in. So there was, that big employer, at that time it was this balance between employers are saying, no, hey, we need someone to protect us. So we've rebalanced from there. But I do think that there's this we need to recognize that as human beings, we're all very unique and we have unique needs. And so this is where these conversations around values, my values are going to be different from the two of yours here, and I expect from our callers as well. And then there's also demographics. Young people, younger than me, are in search of an experience. So they might be in for a short time and they're like, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want. There are going to be those other folks who, when we talk about being employee centric, so there's the young people in search of an experience, or perhaps new Canadians are in search of a different experience. So they're jumping from employer to employer, or folks that will go around the street, go around the corner to another employer because they're in search of a bigger paycheck, and they're trying to build their career that way. I also think that where this pendulum shift has come in, which I love, is that we're creating a kinder world, a kinder workplace environment where there's more hands going up saying, we're talking about things like microaggressions, right? I don't feel safe. I don't feel secure. I don't feel welcome. So some of these things that were just kind of pushed to the side going, oh, you're too sensitive, or that's just Joe, no big deal, or Mary's bark is louder than her bite, this sort of thing. We're creating a kinder workplace culture and workplace environments because employees are asking for more. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a really great perspective there, Michelle. And, hitting on that kinder, I think in today's world in general, just looking at, everything around us and how things are going, that this idea of being kinder, just simply kinder, is so hugely important. Sherry, we have a variety of viewers from HR professionals and managers to individual contributors. What is one closing thought that you'd like to leave in support of creating greater connections in the workplace?
I think my best piece of advice is to be intentional about it, and to keep it front of mind. We are all humans and we all want that connection. I do believe that. So leading with kindness, that's a very important one. And leading with the human in mind, I think is really, really important. You know, starting the conversation, even though you're very busy, how are you? How was your day? In fact, the three of us, when we got on right before this, Michelle, how was your weekend? How are you? You know, there's something really important about that. Even though you might feel up against time, that time is very well spent.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's, you know, the intentional part of this is so, it just resonates so well. And it's something that we all need to be, you know, for lack of better terms, mindful of.
Yes.
This brings us to kind of a close. Before I do that, Michelle, I'm going to hand it over to you to, you know, maybe have a closing thought here as well that you'd like to share, but then we can also wrap as we are at the bottom of the half.
Yeah, thanks, Ahmed. Fantastic conversation. I knew, Sherry, we would just talk through these 30 minutes with no problem at all. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
I'll talk quickly about our next Mindful Monday. It's about money. It's about total compensation. And we're going to be talking with Jen Farron of Comp Savvy, who knows a thing or two about compensation strategies for employers, for organizations. We're going to be talking about why these are important, not only from a transparency perspective, but from an engagement perspective and from a retention perspective. So that's happening in June, and really looking forward to that. But once again, Sherry, thank you so much for your time today, for connecting and sharing your thoughts today.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
Also, a quick shout out to all of the folks online here, a few from familiar names. So thank you to all of you who showed up. And thank you to Ahmed for guiding the conversation along today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
All right. Until next time, be well, everyone.